All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Afterburner presentation. We've got individuals and team members from the banking industry, from the tech industry, from the healthcare industry, all across the spectrum of marketplace in corporate America and across the globe, and they're all here for one thing. We're halfway through 2016. We want to know, are your annual objectives on track to be completed? If not, how do we make a pivot and make sure that they are? Here's a startling statistic that we'll begin with. 33% of expected results are achieved. Companies achieve only 33% of the strategic goals that they set out to achieve in the beginning of the year. The gap between those goals, between the start and the end, is called the execution gap. Where we begin and where we end up and where we really want to end up, the execution gap is where we're going to focus our attention. Because you have a chance and opportunity to address that right now. You have a chance to right the ship and get the organization pointed in the right direction so they can achieve their organizational objectives, and we do that through the debrief. So Q3 is here. You're here because you want to stop repeating mistakes. I know that there's a lot of good things that happened in the first half of 2016 for your organization, but I also know that you saw mistakes being made along the way. And you want to make sure that we don't keep making those mistakes. How do we learn as a team, as an organization? How do we pivot from the things we did poorly in the past and do them better in the future? You want to leverage your best practices. There's a lot of things that you're doing well along the way too. How do we scale that? How do we scale the best practices from one part of the company to the other? How do we scale the best practices from one continent to the other for the global organizations? How do we update our progress? How do we take the temperature for those annual objectives and ensure that we're progressing towards them? And if not, we make the pivot so that we can progress towards them so that we can succeed in the second half of 2016. How do we do that? Well, in my world, we do that through a debrief. Here's what we're going to talk about today. Go a little bit into who we are at Afterburner, who I am. We'll talk about why debrief in the first place. Why is this something that we harp on so much that we believe is a force multiplier for businesses and elite teams everywhere. We'll talk about the stealth debrief, the process that we use at Afterburner, which has its roots on elite military teams to make teams more effective. We'll talk about some initial tips for your debrief so you can identify what you did well in Q2, what you did poorly, and how you can pivot and move into the future. And then finally, we'll do questions and answers with an actual client ace. An ace that's joined us to talk about his progress for the past year and a half using the flawless execution methodology and particularly the debrief. So this is me. I'm Thor. That's my call sign. That's my nickname. I hail out of Atlanta, Georgia. I'm the president of Afterburner. Graduated from the Air Force Academy, went on to fly fighter planes and trainer aircraft for 17 years, flew more than 2,500 missions, most of those as an instructor in fighter aircraft, and today I'm here because I want to share that information with you, the lessons learned that we have. I don't say that to impress you, I say that to impress upon you that the success rate that we share with organizations was built out of a written in blood methodology in a high stakes environment, wrought with complexity. And we took the roots of that methodology and want to share them with you here today. At Afterburner, we really do three things. The first thing we do, if you've seen us on stage in the past, we're working to empower your teams, make them more effective. Then we want to equip your teams with the tools of flawless execution. How do you go out and go execute the methodology? And finally, how do we take our hands off the steering wheel, allow this to be the new normal, and embed the culture within your organization that allows your teams to just naturally progress towards a continuous improvement mentality? We do that through the flawless execution methodology. Flawless execution to us means elite military teams who had to succeed and had to learn how to do it better the next time, built this methodology of planning, briefing, executing, and most importantly, debriefing, and so they can get it better each and every time. Because here's the thing. We all learn. There's a school of hard knocks going on, right? And your teams right now are out there learning something. But the trick is, are they learning fast enough? Are they overcoming the rate of change that's out there in the marketplace right now? If we're just learning from the school of hard knocks, well then our learning curve is not going to be that high. But if we deliberately plan, We collaboratively bring the team members, the stakeholders in the room, get their buy-in, get their fingerprints on the plan, get their belief in it. Well, then we can kick it off with a briefing. This acts like the starter gun for execution. We can transition between the collaborative planning phase and the aligned execution phase. And then in the execution phase, we come up with a way to mitigate the inevitable pop-up threat. We know something's going to pop up to try to derail us from our mission objective. How are we going to mitigate that and work around it as a team? And then finally, debrief. How do we look backwards and figure out what went well, what didn't? Have that awkward conversation about how each of us can do things a little bit better so that in the future we're more successful. When we do it that way, we see the learning curve stand on its tail. When we do it that way, we take the new team members and accelerate their experience so that they have the skill set of a veteran in a shorter amount of time. So for the past 20 years, we've gone out and done engagements with clients all across the globe. And over 3,000 organizations and 1.5 million people, we've asked them the same question. How well do you plan? How well do you brief? How well do you execute? And how well do you debrief? Let's take a look at this data and see what it tells us. Well, on planning, you say, we did that pretty well. We planned at about a 6.85 level, maybe a little less than a 7, so slightly above average, maybe above average at my organization. Briefing, I don't quite know what that is, but we, notionally, I guess we kick off our missions or our projects with a conversation, so maybe we brief, but boy, can we execute. Everybody we talk to says this, we are good at executing. We can execute our way out of a problem. We can catch that plate before it hits the floor. And when I hear that, what I'm really hearing is this, we're good at being reactive. We're good at working our way out of a problem instead of proactively navigating that problem, a predictable threat, before we even got there. And then finally, debrief, people say, well, this is the thing that we just leave off the table. I guess if I have to score it on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say we're around a 3.73 for 1.5 million people and 3,000 organizations. And if you're like those organizations, maybe you see that and you breathe a sigh of relief because the rest of the world is doing it that way too. Here's my challenge to you. That's changing. As we talk more about agility, as we talk about organizations that are able to be nimble in the marketplace, that information is changing and it's trending upwards because everyone is looking to debrief more effectively. So why should we debrief? Why should we look backwards at Q2 and identify the things we can improve? Well, first of all, we want to stay ahead of the rate of change in the marketplace. Things are changing faster than ever before. S&P 500, the average lifespan of a company that goes in there went from 30 years down to 7 years. The business cycle, if you create a great new product, you used to be able to enjoy profit from that product for about a 7-year time period. That's gone down to about 3 years. This is so front of mind that the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company in the tech industry said to us that, hey, this is not about a company that's in transition. Our industry is in transition. We're along for the ride. We've got to find our second act of innovation, and that's a feat that's typically elusive to tech companies. So if you read between the lines there, this person's saying, we've already seen the product cycle shift, and it's much smaller. We've got to move faster so that we can go grab those new opportunities more quickly than we have in the past. Next one is to make it through the great shift change. If you don't know what this is, you'll know soon enough. This is where the baby boomers, the folks with all the great corporate knowledge, the veterans on our team are about to leave the industry. They're being replaced with millennials. And a lot of organizations we talk to say those millennials don't quite have the skill sets yet that they need to take the reins from this company, and it makes them uncomfortable. The quote I got from a CEO in the finance industry was, we've got a top-heavy organization in terms of talent. A lot of the talent lives up here. And the problem with that is it's getting ready to exit, and the new team members have a lot of catching up to do, and there just isn't that much time. Next, the word of the decade. We want to become a more agile organization. We hear that all the time. We want to become an organization that learns and adapts from the past. Senior Vice President of the tech industry said, look, success can hide 1,000 hills. When things are going well, we never answer, why did that product succeed? Why did that one fail? We never answer those questions, and so we don't capture the root cause and get a lesson learned to pivot from. So let's talk about what debriefing could do for your organization. And this information doesn't come from us. These are statistics that were gathered from a meta-analysis of over 40 different HBR studies and MIT studies on the debrief and how the debrief made teams more effective for athletic teams, in the business world, and in military teams. And they determined that if you just do an unstructured debrief, you're going to see a 22% chance of success, greater than had you not debriefed. So your chances are 22% higher that your team will be successful on that next mission. And all that means is you're just sitting around the table saying, all right, what did you like about that? What do we stop doing? What do we continue doing? What do we start doing? Now, if you create a structured debrief, which means that I'm going to do this in a methodical way. I'm going to do this in a way that identifies a specific root cause and pivots that into the lesson learned to make us more effective. A structured debrief nearly doubles that at 38% more effective. And this is where it gets really exciting. If you bring a third-party facilitator along the way, someone else to facilitate that dialogue, that conversation, it goes up by an additional 27%. And so you're saying, all right, Thor, I hear the numbers, I get it, you know, it sounds like it's positive and it looks like there's a lot of research to show it's effective, but what do those numbers really mean to me? Let's use an example. So I talked about earlier how there's a 33% chance of strategic objectives getting accomplished in the workplace. We say we're going to do something 1/3 of the time that gets done. I know what you're thinking. You see that number and you're saying, well, that's not the way it is at my company. I know that's the company that's doing poorly. You are bringing up the average. So your company is doing a lot better than that. Let's say that you are a couple of standard deviations above that and your company achieves a 60% success rate. And let's say you're not debriefing. But I'll give you this, you're probably learning from the School of Hard Knocks, right? Remember that slide where I showed you the shallow learning curve? You're benefiting from the School of Hard Knocks, and we're going to give you 5% improvement each time. After 3 iterations, after 3 projects with the same team, here's what your chances of success are going to look like. You're going to have improved to a 66% chance of achieving your next mission objective. It's bumped up from 60 to 66. All right, so with the debrief, once again, same company, you achieve a 60% success rate. Now you do a debrief, and you use the structured debrief format. And reminder, this is 38% improvement each time that you do it from the studies that Harvard did. After 3 iterations, your team now has an 86% chance of success just by doing a structured debrief with your team members. You're starting to believe this now. You're saying, wow, there may be something to this, and I need to bring this into my organization. But does this really work in practice? Can this really work in application? Let's take a look at the data. We supported a mission last year where they said we want to increase our year-over-year monthly sales by 10%. We've had stagnant sales. We've had flat sales for a long time. And the result? They increased their year-over-year sales by 8% for the month of August. Not bad, right? 8% improvement. The company was excited about it. We'd rather see them go above that 10% and achieve their mission objective, but we did a debrief, and we did a structured conversation about what went well, what didn't, and we determined that the root cause of their failure was that they had weak merchandise demos and few client references. When they did succeed, where they were able to see that 8% bump, was when they had strong merchandise, when they had great client references to be able to discuss with the client. So the lesson learned, the way they pivoted, was that they created a new demo video. They shared 3 key client references with the entire sales team. Next month, they had a 15% year-over-year monthly sales increase. Because that's what it's all about. It's not just getting to the goal line of the existing mission. It's getting to the goal line and then pivoting and iterating, giving your teams permission to fail in small ways so that they stop repeating mistakes in the future and they succeed in big ways down the road. Next case study. This group wanted to win the Super Bowl. This was the New York Giants back in 2011, and their result when they called up Afterburner, they were 4-4 mid-season. 4 wins, 4 losses. Their goal was to win the Super Bowl, and it didn't look like they were even going to make it to the playoffs at that point. We did some analysis with their team, and we determined that the root cause for their challenges was a lack of a debrief culture. I'm sure they watched Monday videos and, talked about what went well and what didn't go well, but they didn't have a culture that lived that. They didn't have a culture that said, we need to conduct structured debriefs after each play. We need to do it within the huddle. We need to do it between quarters. We need to do it after games. How can we quickly assess what went well and what didn't in the previous play, make a pivot, and become more effective in the future? And the exciting story at the end of that one, Giants win the Super Bowl at the end of that year, and our CEO is on the sideline with them. But it's about more than just getting the ball across the goal line. If life was just about getting projects done or getting missions done, I wouldn't have a heart for it. It's about living the culture, living a debrief culture. If you saw our first presentation, I told you about an individual that had gone to one of our events and said, I really like this flawless execution mindset, and I'm actually going to apply it to something that's really personal to me, my fitness. This person said, for a long time, I've been overweight and out of shape, and I've tried different ways to approach this challenge, and I just haven't been able to fix it. And he said, this is the situation back in February. I'm weighing in at about 250 pounds. It's not my natural weight. This individual said, my father died 7 years from my age, and which is pretty young, and I don't know how much longer I'm going to be around if I don't fix this quickly. So he planned. He created a mission plan to success, We supported him. We did XGAP sessions and conducted calls with this individual, sent him inspirational videos. And then if you were here with us a couple weeks ago, you saw this picture, which is where he'd sent us a picture of the scale at the mission completion point. 1 pound, no wasted effort, 1 pound underneath 200. But here's the point. We didn't stop there. I called him this week and said, let's have a debrief. Let's determine what worked well, what didn't, what was challenging throughout all of this. Because it's not just about getting to 200 pounds, it's about figuring out what your lifestyle needs to be in the future. How do we sustain this? How do we get passionate and excited about living this moving forward? And we identified some key things that went well for him during the period, some things that didn't, and he's got a way to pivot and move into the future to work smarter, not harder. Nobody's excited about doing 5-mile runs every morning for the rest of their lives. But if you can figure out a way to do it smartly, a way to approach your diet and your exercise in a smart way to be more effective, I'll buy into that. And the same mindset we can apply to our business projects. All right, so you're saying, fine, I get it, I buy it. The debrief works. I still don't know how. I'm not sure how I can take my team, sit them down, look backwards, and figure out what went well and what didn't, because it's already kind of awkward having that conversation when we do that. I'm going to show you the stealth debrief that we use for every one of our debrief sessions. First one, you're going to set the time and place. That's saying when it's going to start, when it's going to end. We start on time, we end on time. You don't go 1 minute over. Next, you want to set the tone of open communication that's going to last throughout the entire debrief. Because remember, this conversation is already going to be a little bit uncomfortable if you don't have a debriefing culture. You need to establish the tone that allows that dialogue to take place, allows for the constructive criticism, not towards a person, it's nameless and rankless, towards a project, towards a mission objective to be conducted. And then you're going to talk about your execution versus the mission objective. How did we do versus our line in the sand, which defines success. Then let's analyze our execution. Let's roll the snowball back up the hill on the critical elements of success or failure and find the root cause. Don't stay superficial. Don't just go with the first why. Ask why 5 times and find the most significant event in that error chain or the first event in that error chain, and then do the most important thing next, and that is pivot to the lesson learned. What are we going to do differently the next time? How are we going to approach the future more intelligently? How are we going to approach the future to leverage that best practice to avoid making the same mistake? And if that lesson learned is important enough, is impactful enough, let's transfer that. Let's share that outside of our team. You have a great sales team lesson learned. Let's share that across the continent. Tell Europe how to do that better with their attempts. Let's call Australia and share that lesson learned. Let's transfer that information so the entire organization can benefit. And then finally, end on a high note. If we've been having a lot of conversations about what we can do better as leaders, we need to inspire our teams to end on a high note. Okay, so as you're getting ready for your Q2 debrief, here's what I recommend you do. First up, set the time and place. Determine who needs to attend. Think about this beforehand. Don't just set up a meeting and walk in there and expect for you to have a fruitful debrief without doing some preparation. Plan for doing this for 2 hours, 1 hour if you bring a facilitator. When we facilitate these events, it takes a max of 1 hour, but when we watch these take place, a minimum of 2 hours is what I would recommend. They can be remotely dispersed. So you're saying, do I got to fly my whole team in for this and pay for the T&E? No, you don't. You can do these over a WebEx, over a phone bridge. I highly recommend, though, that you don't just do it over the phone. This needs to be something that's interactive. Use slides, use data for them to see. Assign pre-reads. Make sure that you're not catching everybody up with the current situation during that debrief. Make them read about how things went during the execution phase so they can begin to analyze and draw their own conclusions to share during the debrief. And then finally, determine your debrief focus points. Don't just show up and say, hey folks, what do you want to talk about? Say, what are the 3 questions that we want to have answered? What are the 3 things that we won't walk out of here without understanding why that occurred as the root cause and what we're going to do differently or how we're going to scale that success? Next, you need to set the tone. And when you set the tone that allows us to have a critical conversation, it starts with yourself. When you set the tone that allows us to have a dialogue where I can tell that person what they did differently, and Sally, I really wish you would have done this on step 2, and Bob, you know, I was counting on you on June 1st to make that happen. That's not the way it goes. We need to start with ourselves. And then after we're critical of ourselves, we request additional critiques. And we're not apologizing to the team. We're not doing this in a, gee whiz, hat in hand manner. We're doing this in a way that just says, this is what I said I was going to do. I deviated from it. There's no such thing as the perfect mission. And so here's how I'm going to do things differently in the future. You're setting that tone that it's acceptable to make mistakes as long as you don't repeat mistakes. After you request additional critiques, wait for the team to respond, because it'll take a while. If you don't have this culture yet, it's going to be a little bit of an awkward silence as you wait. But I'm telling you, that after that first hand goes up, you're going to have to tell the rest of the folks to put their hands down after the comments begin, because you're going to start getting the first wave of criticism and starting to set that culture to have an open and honest conversation about what we can all do better. Next up, restate the mission objective. Now, if you're saying to me, well, I don't really know what my mission objective was for Q2. I mean, I guess I had a profit number that I was going for, but I'm not sure what the mission objective was. If you don't have a mission objective as the leader, well, then we already know your #1 lesson learned you get from the debrief. Always have a mission objective. If you don't know the mission objective, I guarantee you your team is not aligned to what they need to accomplish at this stage. So we need to align them, not now at the end of Q2, but at the beginning of Q2, so they're aware of what they're committing to and what their actions are going to be judged against. Next up, let's analyze our execution. As we look backwards at Q2, tell your teams, find the root cause of that debrief focus point. You had a success. What's the root cause for that success? We've not been that successful in the past. How did we make that happen? We've made a mistake. How did that occur? How are we going to ensure that doesn't occur again? And continue asking why until you get to the true root cause. After you have a list of root causes, start to look for recurring root causes. Do we have a communication problem at our organization? Do we have a challenge with organization? Are we maybe less disciplined than we could be? People are showing up late to meetings, a little bit late with their suspenses, and so we don't really have a culture that supports that. Well, that could be a recurring root cause that we want to address next in the lesson learned. Now, if you're like most organizations that currently debrief, we already established very few organizations debrief. But if you're smiling to yourself and saying, well, we already do. My organization, we look backwards, we have our after-action review, we have our ways of assessing ourselves in the past. What I tell you is it usually ends on the last step. Most organizations that we audit find that they're really just doing a history lesson. And by that I mean they get to this point and they say, oh, that's why we failed in that sales attempt. Oh, that's why we succeeded. But they fail to go to the next step, which is to say, what are we going to do differently? What's our lesson learned? And by the way, when I talk about specific actions to avoid repeating mistakes and addressing root causes, I'm not saying, oh, well, obviously we need to communicate better, or, you know, we need to be more organized in the future. Well, no kidding. Everybody needs to do that. You need to create the laundry list of things that you're going to do differently. Make it specific so that if you handed it off to somebody else without having any more conversation with them, they'd understand exactly what they need to do to be more effective into the future. What will you specifically do differently in the second half of the year? In Q3, what are you going to do to leverage best practices and avoid repeating mistakes? Specific. All right, so then we got our great lessons learned. Let's get into the rest of the team. Share with the other teams. Share with other individuals within your functional group. Share with leadership. If it's good enough, let's make this the new normal. Let's create a standard operating procedure around this behavior. If you're debriefing Q2 and you find a success, hey, make that the standard operating procedure for what we do moving forward. And then finally, end on a high note. That probably sounds a little weird from a fighter pilot to say, hey, we're going to cheerlead our team and end on a high note at this point. But I'll tell you why we do that. If we don't, we've talked a lot about things we can improve as a team. And I know your organizations are actually doing well right now. I work with most of the folks on the call. And I know that your teams are succeeding in some exciting ways. And you don't want to lose sight of that. You're going to spend a lot of the debrief conversation talking about the few ways you can continue to improve, but you want to remind your teams at the end, hey, there was a lot that went well in Q2. Let's not forget that. Let's capture that as we move forward. Let's talk about how we're progressing towards our strategic goals. We had some missions in Q2 and in Q1. They moved the needle on our strategic objectives. And then how will the lessons learned ensure future success? This is a great one if you just had a really poor Q2 and right now you're saying, well, I really can't even find anything for the team to be excited about. If that's the case, then I would tell you, at a minimum, you at least are walking out of the debrief with a set of lessons learned that will ensure that you never make those same mistakes again. And that's pretty powerful in and of itself. All right, so 3 tips for your first debrief. Number 1, lesson learned. We hear this again and again and again. The number 1 lesson learned in all the debriefs we do, probably about 80% of them, one person raised their hand and says, why did this mission matter? You need to start with why, continue with why, and end with why. And you're saying, yeah, but Thor, I've told them 3 times already why this mission is so important. You need to change that mindset, shift that around, and say, I've told them 3 times, only 4 more until it's going to sink in. the most common critique we hear is, I never understood why this mission was so important. Even in those missions that succeeded, they'll tell us, I almost resented that you dragged me across the goal line on this particular project without teaching me why it was so important along the way. Number 2 lesson learned is start with a clear plan. We said it earlier, if you don't have a clear mission objective, if your team is not violently aligned to exactly what success looks like at the end of this quarter, at the end of this month, at the end of this week, well then you cannot hold them accountable. They're going to say, we didn't start with a clear plan, so you can't hold me accountable. Wait a second, I never agreed to do that step. You know, that's great that you thought I was going to do it, but I was doing these 3 other projects, and you and I never had a conversation that established you had my buy-in, my accountability, and my commitment to accomplishing this. And then next, debrief a win first. So don't debrief the train wreck. I know you're excited about the debriefing process. Don't go back to your teams and say, let's figure out why everything failed last quarter. Debrief something that went well. Debrief something that they're excited to talk about. Get their passion level up and have them talk about the root cause for something that went well. What's the lesson learned? How do we scale that? And then you can move into debriefing things that went poorly afterwards. All right, that's a lot of Afterburner talk, and we're really excited to transition now into questions and answers with our ace. We have Hari Ramakrishnan with us here today. He's the Chief of Staff to the CEO at a $26 billion market cap tech company. And I've been working with Hari and his team for the past year and a half. We've helped to support 50 missions using flawless execution across 3 continents and 20,000 employees in that time frame. I've got a list of questions that I'm going to ask Hari first, and then we're going to open it up to the crowd, and we're going to allow you to ask questions of Hari and find out, how do we really apply this in practice, and what are the things that went well, and what were you challenged by along the way? So first of all, Hari, thank you very much for joining us here today. Really appreciate you taking your time out to discuss how flawless execution has worked within your organization.
Sure, Thor. I hope everybody can hear me.
Yep, loud and clear, Hari. First question is, Hari, can you tell us a little bit how your organization has used the flawless execution methodology over the past 18 months?
Sure. So we got exposed to the Afterburner team as well as the flawless execution methodology about 1.5 years ago. Back in, I think it was January or February of last year, we had our annual leadership summit, as we call it, for the top 250 or so leaders in our company. We exposed them to the Afterburner flawless execution methodology. And everyone liked it so much that we decided to do it again for the next set of leaders in just a couple of months after that.
Awesome. Go ahead.
Sorry. And so after that, what we decided to do was to give the methodology a little bit of a trial run. So we called it a pilot, and we just handpicked a few missions that were important for the company and said, let's try to execute those using flawless execution since everybody liked it so much.
Fantastic. So at the beginning, we know there's always going to be skeptics. There's always going to be folks that say, how's this really going to work within our organization? So what were the holdups about using the methodology, and particularly the debrief?
So, I mean, I think our executive team was pretty on board with the methodology, though I wouldn't say everybody was. In general, VMware, my company, we have a little bit of a culture of consensus, and as a result, if everybody's not on board and people are not aligned, there's always questions that get raised. So those were some of the holdups. The other big holdup was, I think there was a perception in certain quarters that it felt a little bit heavy, especially if you go through all 4 steps. And so people were sort of gravitating towards specific aspects that they liked more than the others, and so those are a couple of the holdups.
That's a great answer. So you just completed a debrief for a mission that you were supporting. How did that debrief go?
I think the debrief went very well, actually. One of the gratifying moments was one of our executive champions, SVPs, actually opened up about what they could do better, which we don't normally see in a typical project, and that was very gratifying to see. And there were specific team members that talked about where they thought the mission went well and where they thought we could do better. All in all, we decided that we're going to continue into our next workshop and implement some of those lessons that we learned from that debrief.
Fantastic. So you and I worked closely together over the past year and a half. You know that we supported 50-plus missions for your organization in that time frame. What was the completion rate? What was the success rate for your 50-plus missions along the way?
I think it was actually pretty high. I would say more like 90% or so.
Yep, I actually know the exact number, and it's 91%. And we mention that to say, when a team commits to this, when you do a debrief, when you actually build in that 38% improvement time and time again, and you facilitate it with a facilitator and add on that additional 27%, you're going to see results like Hari and his team did. It is actually 91% success over 50-plus missions. The things they said they were going to accomplish, 91% of the time they did, versus the industry average of 33% of the time. All right, so that's way higher than the number that we quoted earlier from the Harvard Business Review article. What do you attribute to the success rate for your teams?
Well, I mean, I'd like to think we have the most amazing talent in the industry, right? So I think that probably helped quite a bit. I think one of the big issues we had as a company, we continue to have that in certain respects, especially when we're not using Flex, is we struggle sometimes with getting alignment. And for me, that is the biggest benefit that I've seen off Flex, that especially in the planning process, it tends to drive a ton of alignment around the mission, and in particular, it addresses the issue that you brought up before, Thor, which was, there's questions that are always invariably get raised around why are we doing this mission? Why is it important? Is this the most important mission to go execute? Those questions get openly aired and discussed in the planning session. And then everybody gets bought into why we're doing it and then how we're doing it, more importantly. And therefore, there's just a greater likelihood that people are going to execute on the commitments that they make.
Great stuff. Well, thanks again for joining us today, Hari. At this point, I'd like to open it up to the entire crowd for additional questions, either for Hari or myself. You can send them to the question bank, or you can just type them into the chat box, and our producer will take a look at them and we'll answer those as they come in. Kat, what do we have? All right, so we got one in the question box saying, debriefing, can we conduct the debrief with remotely dispersed individuals? The answer is absolutely, and there were many times during the 50-plus missions that we supported for Hari last year where we were sitting in the room with the leader of the team and nobody else was in there. And they had people from Europe and Asia and Australia on the call and conducted the debrief without any other individuals in that room during that time period. The challenge is you need to have a WebEx type capability. You need to have some format to transfer the information to the rest of the team members, because it is kind of a intellectually heavy discussion about what went well in the past and what didn't go well, and we need to have some format, some media to be able to look at collectively to make that successful.
I'd like to add a point to that, Thor. So actually, the last debrief I did, it was a mix of virtual and physical. So absolutely, the debrief can be done, virtually, especially if you've got alignment on the plan and the mission that you execute. In fact, I would argue that the place where Flex, maybe a little bit more challenged is during the planning cycle. I think that's where the in-person interaction is, at least I found to be extremely important. It's important to look people in the eye and understand what their concerns are and get those openly addressed to drive that alignment that you seek. So I actually would advocate, as much as possible, to have planning sessions in person.
We got another question about whether or not it's appropriate to, you said, we like the debrief. Should we start with a debrief when we go back to work, or should we start with a plan? Here's what I'd say to you. Everybody loves a debrief, and your teams will too. And so instead of selling them on the planning aspect at this point, I say go back and do a debrief. But hey, spoiler alert, you're going to find out that you didn't start with a good plan to begin with. So just realize once you go into that debrief session that they're going to be excited about talking about how we can do things differently in the future, but one of the main things to come out of it is that you need to have an aligned plan next time. That builds the buy-in and the alignment so that you can say, okay, next Wednesday, we're all getting together and we're going to conduct a plan at that time.
How do you truly make the debrief nameless?
Question was, how do you truly make the debrief nameless and rankless? Let me tell you how challenging that is in the world I came from. So I was a fighter pilot, and in my world, when the general's car drives by, even if it's his teenage daughter driving it, I have to stop in my tracks and salute that car. because that's how highly we place rank and title and position and hierarchy within the military. We just have to have that structure when lives are on the line to go carry out the mission. But we take all of that off when we go into a debrief. I actually flew a mission with an individual that was a general, a 4-star general, and he did something that wasn't appropriate in the aircraft, made a mistake, and I took the controls of the plane away from him and did what should have been done with the aircraft and kept us within limits of flight and got us out of an unsafe situation. And when we landed, what do you think the first thing he said to me was in the debrief? Thank you. Because we weren't aligned to his title. We weren't aligned to his rank, even though I had to salute his car, and when he walked out of the building after that debrief, I had to call the entire building to attention. We were aligned to our mission objective. And so the way that you can start to create that on your teams and create a nameless, rankless environment is when you build that buy-in up front and you say, hey, look, you don't have lives on the line, but you have livelihood on the line. You have somebody's passionate dreams on the line. And if you haven't built a passionate dream yet, then that's your fault. Build that with them. Build the sense of why. Make it exciting for them. Make it something that they want to pursue so that they can build some attachment to it, and then you get to have that nameless, rankless debrief at the end. And so we'll facilitate debriefs where some of that nameless, rankless nature, that tone will start to go away. Here's how you handle that. When somebody bristles up at getting critiqued and says, you know, I'm not really comfortable with this conversation and this is going in directions I hadn't anticipated, you say, well, hold on. Remember, this is constructive. We're figuring out how we do things differently the next time. We're a team, and as a team, we're going to have the hard conversations about what we can do better. By the way, this doesn't leave the debriefing room. There are going to be things that each of us can do better the next time. We're going to transfer those lessons learned, but there's not going to be a name attached to those lessons learned. And we're going to go right back to our hierarchy. So when you question the boss in the debrief, it's not going to leave the debriefing room that occurred. Next question.
Tim asked, my team is dispersed into other teams. How can we bring this technique from our department to the individual projects?
You say that again.
My team is dispersed into other teams. How can we bring this technique from our department to the
Great question. So, Tim, what I'm hearing from you is that my team is dispersed. I have functional groups that are already on different missions, on different projects. I'm having to borrow them to support this existing mission. We hear this one all the time. And this is kind of the graduate level thinking, but here's what you got to do. You got to find the champion that's going to strategically lead the progress. In other words, here's what you need to find the individual who at the highest level can be able to say, this is the mission we're going to focus on. I know you have 5 or 6 distractions going on right now. Of the 7 things you think you should be doing, here's the 3 that you are going to do. And it's tough to find that person, and it takes a true leader to wipe the slate clean of the other things that people are doing, but that is the true quality of a leader, that they're able to task shed for their team members. Anybody can pile additional things onto the plate. Find the leader on your team that can tell in a compelling way why this mission needs to take place and others don't. Or, and this is the flip side of the coin, be receptive when that leader says, your mission isn't the most important one. You asked me to task shed, and I'm going to task shed your mission. And that always cuts deep the first time we hear it, and we say, well, that's not what I expected to have in this session. Now, everybody told me that we'd have more alignment towards my mission. But remember, them telling you not to do it allows you to focus your attention, time, and effort on what is important to the organization, on what is important to that leader. David said, how soon after a mission should we debrief? I say as soon as possible, Dave, because remember, people are going on to the next thing right away. So if we had, think about that big sale loss in Q1. Is anybody really excited about getting together now and trying to rehash the details on what occurred during that one and figuring out why that one failed? No, of course not. You have team members that left already. You have the same people aren't even in the room anymore to have that discussion. So as quickly as possible, conduct that debrief, because the longer that you wait in between the end of a mission and conducting a debrief, the longer you're missing those valuable lessons learned. In other words, the longer you are not starting on the next mission smarter and wiser and more effective as a team.
And then ask if you have a challenging team member who's a high performer and may not want to buy in, how do you approach that person?
Kevin said, if you have a challenging team member that doesn't want to create buy-in, how do you approach that person? Well, I'll tell you, there were plenty of fighter pilots that I saw in my world that were just incredible individuals. And there are plenty of individuals at the companies that I'm talking to right now that are just fantastic. But it's not about one person. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you've got to do it as a team. So while we will leverage the impact of that one individual, over time, they're going to see that they're going to have to decide to get on board the train or get off of everything at that point. So you're going to, once you build that team, you build that momentum, you'll be surprised how quickly the team polices itself and holds the team members accountable, even those ones who think that they're special and shouldn't be held accountable. You're going to see how that culture starts supporting your challenges.
Kevin says, how do you hold people accountable over a long period of time?
Kevin said, how do you hold people accountable over a long period of time? Great question, and I would take that one step before that point and say, don't draw the line in the sand for too long of a period of time. Here's what I mean by that. If you go back to other teams and you say, we're going to plan for what we're going to do in the second half of 2016, there's a lot of time between now and December 31st. They don't know if they're going to be sitting in the same seat by then. They may have intentions of leaving the organization. They don't know if they're really going to be held accountable for this, and there's 12 other projects that they're working on. You got to bring that time frame in and say, within the next 30, 45 days, how are we going to be successful? What's the mission objective for that time frame? And so what Kevin, you found now is that has to support the overarching, we call it campaign objective. Your mission, your short-term mission has to be built into the overarching long-term objective. So here's what you do. You first plan out what success looks like down the road in the future, and everybody loves having that conversation. They'll say, oh, we're at 15% EBITDA, and we have great products, and we just threw out 2 new SKUs, and they're really tracking with the market, and it's fantastic. Build on that, and then say, okay, if that's where we're at in a year, what do we have to do in the next 6 months? What does that imply we've got to do in the next month and a half? And that's how you land on a mission objective that you can hold them accountable for in the short term, so that you can ultimately hold them accountable in the long term for the overarching strategy.
Can you debrief in the middle of a project if you don't think it's going to be successful?
Can you debrief in the middle of a project if you don't think it's going to be successful? Yeah, great question. This is a graduate level question. There are a couple times when you want to debrief. One, when you've reached the end of a mission, you've reached the end of a project, you told your team the line in the sand was here, we're going to talk about whether or not we met it. That's the natural time, that's the organic time to do it. The second time is when you have to stop that mission. So for whatever reason, we are no longer progressing with this mission, or you have too many red flags, we need to very quickly assess how do we pivot and turn the mission back around and make it successful. So I absolutely say, if you are 15 days into your 45-day mission, and you as a leader are saying, wow, I'm going to be really surprised if this is successful. That is a threat that you're now aware of. And what do we do with threats that we're aware of? We mitigate them. You're going to mitigate that with a debrief right away. All right, somebody said, what do we do with how do we identify the threats? Well, that goes back more to the planning stage. And in the planning stage, after you determine your mission objective, we're going to have a future webinar session on this and train you on planning. But after you determine your mission objective, the very first question that you want to ask your team is, why will we fail? Why will we not succeed? Fast forward yourself into the future, and you tell me what predictable threat are we going to bump into? And some of you are saying, well, that's so negative. Why would we want to have that pessimistic conversation right away? The answer is this. They're already thinking it. Somebody in the room is already thinking about why it's going to fail, about how we have July 4th holidays coming up, and that we've got additional PTO and vacation at the end of July, and so Q3 is already a wash, and we shouldn't even really hold ourselves accountable to that. You need to voice those opinions right now, because once again, if it's a known threat, you can mitigate it. If it's a known threat, if it's controllable, we can apply some resources towards that, which is the very next question. What resources do we have available to be able to circumvent that threat along the way? Had a question about, can you do missions longer than 45 days? You absolutely can do missions longer than 45 days. You can do them less than 45 days. I say the absolute max that we like to support is 60 days, and the minimum is about a day. And remember, my missions as a fighter pilot lasted sometimes 45 minutes. There are other times they lasted 8 hours. There are other times I supported organizational missions that lasted months. But the point is this, figure out what your cadence is for your organization. Some of the people on the phone have a daily execution rhythm. In other words, they get up and do the same thing every single day. I would call each day a mission. And you're going to have a notional planning session very quickly aligned with your team. You're going to have a debrief, and you can even do that on a daily basis. That's not going to be an hour-long debrief. That's going to be a quick 5-minute, all right, what was our objective today? Did we meet it? No. Why did we not meet it? Okay, what's the root cause? What's the lesson learned? What are we going to do differently tomorrow? And then once you establish that execution rhythm, you can figure out how you can be more effective in the future.
Can we debrief with the group we're dependent on but may not have directly part of our planning activities and may have a different agenda?
Can we debrief with the group that we're dependent on that may have a different agenda and may have different planning activities? Here's what I hear you really saying in that question. Can I debrief with a group that I haven't built alignment with, that I haven't built buy-in and commitment with? And the answer is yes, you can, but I wouldn't expect it to be as effective. And so what the lesson learned will end up being is, if those are key stakeholders, if those are people you count on for success, then those are individuals that need to be a part of the planning session. So when you do your debrief, you're going to say, hey, a big lesson learned is we need to include your team and build your buy-in and make sure we're on your schedule and on your radar for Q3 so that we can ensure a success on this critical mission. All right, at this point, we've reached the end of the time. We've got a couple more questions. We'll be more than happy to answer those offline and answer those via email. Here are my tips for the rest of the team. So what next? Bottom line, first and foremost, debrief. Conduct a nameless, rankless debrief with your team. You're going to improve your chances of success for the next mission by 22%. Next up, use a structured debrief. Have a format that you walk to the table with. Determine how exactly you're going to hold that dialogue, because it's not an easy one, and you can walk away bruised a little bit after having that awkward conversation or kind of ruffling feathers if you don't approach it the right way. And then last, use a third-party facilitator. Bring somebody in who's not part of the conversation. Better yet, bring in Afterburner, the experts at debriefing, the elite military team members that had to do this over thousands of missions and have done it again and again and again to determine the lessons learned. Help us to have that conversation with you. And then finally, create the debrief culture to create a learning culture. If you're as a leader saying, I am just so tired of managing my teams, if I have to go walk around one more team and hold people accountable and look over their shoulders and make sure they're doing what they're supposed to, you don't have a learning culture. You don't have a culture that debriefs right now. The debrief is the first step to creating that environment. At this time, folks, I'd like to tell you that we would love to help you out and answer any questions you've got about debriefing or any other part of flawless execution. Connect with us on LinkedIn. Check out our white papers. We've written very many from past client references and case studies. Follow us on Twitter to see who we're working with each week. Email me directly with any questions you have. And remember, this is a demo-do process. If you tell me, I'll forget. If you show me, I'll remember. If we do it together, I'll understand. If we do it together, we can lead you through this in a way that we've done thousands of times with 3,000 companies and 1.5 million people in the past. Thanks for your time and attention. I hope to see you at a future Afterburner training session.